Welcome to The Recurring Plot, presented by Curb and Turf. On this show, we interview agritourism farmers, authors, leaders, and influencers who share their insights on growing and monetizing your agritourism business. Here's your host, Dustin Reed.
Hi, this is Dustin from Curb and Turf. You're listening to The Recurring Plot, which talks about all things RVs and how to make more recurring income from your property. We're excited to have Dave Pechan on the show today. Thanks for joining us today, Dave. So for those that don't know you, can you give a brief introduction about you and where you're from and kind of give us a lowdown on what you do?
Well, I was born in Minnesota, but my family moved to California in 1960. I was 9 years old. And so I've lived pretty much the rest of those years here in California. I served in the military for 3.5 years, got out in 1975 at the end of the Vietnam War. And I became a pilot at age 20, used my GI Bill benefits to get my advanced ratings. And I flew crop dusters for 5 years right out of the military. And then I operated other businesses. I stopped crop dusting in 1980. I did a short stint as a commuter airline pilot. And I went on and did construction work. I've built, half a dozen homes and 3 small commercial buildings over the years. And the biggest venture and I also owned auto body shop and tow service. But my biggest venture was started about 26 years ago now when I bought land here in Linden, California. We're just east of Stockton. And I wanted to farm. And so we bought this property. It was just bare ground. There was a house on it, and which needed work at the time. And so we're still here today. It's grown into a pretty successful small winery. We make wines and bottle wines that we ship to over 400 wineries in 45 states. We have done exports to China, Vietnam, and South Korea, and it's become a pretty successful small business.
That's awesome. So it sounds like you've obviously had a quite experience of just, life in general, where you've had multiple almost careers, right. It seems like, with your expertise in being a pilot, and then also you're being in the military. So, and then not only that, just your construction history. So that's probably helped you with the winery. Or what? So what kind of, you mentioned that what sparked the interest of starting the vineyard, the winery for you?
In Minnesota, we're farmers for generations, in actually Minnesota and Iowa. And so when I was a kid, we spent time on my uncle's farm. I learned to drive a tractor at 8 years old. And so that had an impact on me. And that's one of the reasons when I got older, I couldn't get started farming. It's so expensive, but I started crop dusting. Sort of tied two things that I liked together. But at any rate, at age 46, I sold some commercial properties that I developed, and it gave me a grub stick to get started farming. And after a few years of farming grapes, I realized that I was too small a grower to make a decent living. And so the answer to the problem, it seemed to me, was to start a winery and have more control over the price of my products. And so that led us on the road of starting a winery, and it's primarily developed through trial and error, but we've developed into a pretty successful small business. We have 7 employees. We're looking to hire 2 more right now.
That's awesome. And that's good to see that those interests from your childhood carried over to, obviously, to your later years. So, that's something to speak on, just because you continue on pursuing something that you had curiosity about or had experience when you were younger, and then you're able to carry that up, as a business, which is pretty great.
It's neat to be farming.
Yeah. So what's your favorite part about, just having a vineyard or winery?
And for me, it's being able to live in the country, and this particular property is really special to us because it sits on a bit of a knoll, and on clear mornings we can see the Coast Range Mountains. They're probably 150 to 200 miles away. And I'm looking to the west, and if we look to the east, we can see all the white caps of the Sierra. And so it's a really beautiful place.
So for those that don't know, what's the name of your vineyard and where is it located?
It's Miramont Estate, and it's located in Linden, California. And we have a website. They can go to our website, miramontestate.com.
Perfect. And how many acres do you have on the estate?
40.
That's awesome. And you mentioned that so has it always been like that where you had kind of growth, or how has the business, I mean, how can you give us a kind of history of Miramont Estates, or, the ebbs and flows of it?
Well, we planted in 1998, bought it in 97, and 98 we were able to plant. And there were a lot of struggles. We had frost the first year that wiped out 4,000 plants that we had to replant. Our first harvest was in the year 2000, and we had a contract with a co-op, I guess you'd describe it. And the co-op was supposed to market our grapes for it, except they didn't have a buyer for the grapes in 2000. And so they shipped them off to a winery in Paso Robles who made it into wine, and then we were supposed to get paid when the wine sold. It took us 5 years to collect for that crop over, little payments. So that was not a good experience. And the second year of the contract was...
Why did it take so long for you guys to get it paid out?
Because I would only get paid as they sold the wine.
Oh, I see.
And so it took them a long time. So then in the next
Right.
year, they came to me and said, well, we don't have a market for your grapes right away, so we're going to do the same thing. We'll take it to a different winery, make it into wine. And then they called me a few months later and said, oh, we're going to sell it for 45 cents a gallon. And I said, what? That's crazy. But this was during $2 Chuck. Remember the cheap wine that was the rage back then? And they sold mine along with several other growers. All of our stuff was sold to Fred Franzia for 45 cents a gallon. And then they charged us $1.30 a gallon to make it into wine. So we not only grew the grapes and delivered them and didn't make any money, we were forced to subsidize the winemaking cost. So that was really bad. So I only had 1 year remaining on the contract, and I sent him a letter and I said, just release me. I'll take care of this on my own. I'll find a way to market the grapes. And no, they sent me a letter back and said, no, we'll charge you a 10% penalty because you're obligated under the contract to deliver or pay a penalty. So I wrote them back and said, all right, deal's a deal, I'll deliver. And then in August of that year, they sent me another letter and said, we don't want your grapes. And so we that year, it was too late to find another buyer because we were harvesting in September.
Yeah.
So I'd already made arrangements the year before with a local winery to crush part of my 2001 crop and make it into bulk wine. And so we took all of it then in 2002 to that winery. And so then I had all this bulk wine to sell. And we started advertising it in little advertiser sheets that we could advertise that would just go out to wineries and things. And out of that grew the business. It started just shipping small quantities of bulk wine. And then after a few years, we were buying wines from other wineries and remarketing them, combined with the stuff that we grow here. And the result is we just kept growing. And eventually we added our first bottling line, and we started selling bottled wine to other wineries. And we'd actually bottle it and label it with their label. And then we added a sparkling wine bottling line, and so that we can do sparkling wines. And so now 2/3 of our business or more, it goes out of here bottled product, finished product. And then the remainder is still sold in small quantities in bulk of, between the smallest is a drum, 55 gallons, up to 330 gallons in a square tote. And that's developed into a pretty successful business for us.
Go ahead.
No, that's pretty much our story.
So it sounds like with the contract was kind of a good and bad thing for you in a way, where obviously you experienced probably something you weren't expecting, but then out of that you probably were able to grow just because you kind of knew where those pain points were, and then you were able to address those just because it seems like you took the middleman out of it.
That's exactly what we did. We felt we had to do that or we wouldn't make it.
What would you do differently, or what kind of advice would you give to someone that's looking into going into a winery, or going into into this business, or what kind of advice would you give them?
Be prepared to go for years without any income. And we didn't break even on the winery for about year 10.
And that's kind of how it is for a lot of businesses just in general. And then I'm sure it's probably even longer for something where, you know, winery and stuff where you're based you're basing it on your yield, what you're getting for that harvest, and then you have to have vendors, you have to have all these other things lined up,
right,
to where you can actually make it successful.
the licensing is difficult because you have a federal license to make the wine, and you have state licenses, and then there are local ordinances that involve the use permits for the property, and it just goes on and on and on. Yeah.
And I'm sure it's not that easy in California.
No, it's
so
pretty.
so obviously there's a cost of entry, and you're saying it took you 10 years just to even make a profit, right?
Right.
So was there at any point where you're just like, was there like a tipping point where you're like, okay, this is going to work? Or how close were you, not like, from not doing it? Or are you completely committed to seeing it through?
Well, I guess there were times when we didn't know for sure how we'd see it through, just because the financial demands were so tough, But my wife worked, and she paid most of the bills those first 10 years. And I worked on the ranch full time. Plus, actually, I was developing some of those commercial properties at the same time. And when those were sold later on, they laid the groundwork to expand the winery. Because one of the issues, it's a very capital intensive business. And so, we started with one small building. That one was about 2,200 square feet on the ground. But now we have, I think it's 23,000 square feet under roof.
Oh, wow.
And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4 winery buildings now on the property. And
so it's like 10 times the size.
Yeah. And so it was, we built as we could afford or get the loans to expand. And so it was, it's just that kind of a thing. So, and then a lot of it was bootstrap in terms of just out there. I, laid in all the irrigation and the drip lines and steel and everything else that goes into the vineyard. Me and one helper literally did the front 25 acres, just 2 of us. And
That's crazy.
Huge amount of work. 7 days a week. There were no days off. It was just.
Yeah, because I grew up on a dairy, and I come from like 3 generations of farmers, and so I knew the kind of hours that you had to put in, because I was doing some of that when I was younger, and so it's not easy, and they don't, especially if you have livestock, they need to be fed every day. So there's just things that where you literally have to do those things because there's no days off.
Right.
So
Right. Well, we have stuff now, but in the early days there weren't. There was just work.
Right. You have to get to a point to where okay, now that we have employees, we could start taking days off. But then,
that's right.
Yeah, it's, especially starting out, I could only see how, I don't know. For me, bless your heart, just because I don't know if I would have the vision that you did as far as seeing things through, but I'm sure you're so much of a believer of your own product or what the vision that you had, that you were able to see that through.
And part of,
So,
yeah,
which is great.
and part of that is that when you have everything you own and everything you've worked for invested in one place, right? It's like you either make it, or it's like everything you've worked for is gone, you know?
Yeah, it's sink or swim.
Yeah,
Yep. It's because you haven't you had a lot invested into it. You both did, you and your wife, just because, I'm sure there's lots of long restless nights that you guys had, just
mm,
trying to make ends meet
right,
for 10 years.
right,
And then not only that, trying to have growth, do the licensing, do all the government ordinances and all that stuff that you had to go through
right.
on top of that.
Yeah, it was hell by fire.
Well, so what's your favorite part about owning land? You kind of mentioned you love the views, like obviously, you it sounds like you have mountain views on east and west side,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So what other favorite things do you have about owning your land, or what drives you to get up in the morning with your business?
Well, now I've reached the point after all these years. My son-in-law's our general manager, so I get to pick and choose what I'm work on, and so that's pretty. I work on things like, minor repairs on equipment and stuff like that. I take care of stuff like that, and I drove tractor for, I don't know, about a day and a half last week. I'll probably do that some more if it dries out, and I enjoy that, being out in the vineyard. And so it's really nice that, I have the freedom to do whatever projects I want to work on. I go out every morning, say hello to everybody, find out what's going on in the business today, and just, I'm comfortable with the way everything's working now. But it was hard to get to this point, and so and I mean, I control my destiny in the sense that, yeah, I get up every morning. I'm up early, just like I've always gotten up early. I'm usually up around 5, and but it's by choice, and it's just what I do. And I don't commute to work. I haven't commuted to work most of my life, since business has always been where we lived. And so I walk out the door, and I just decide on what it is I should be working on today. I go work on it, and that's incredibly valuable to me.
Mm. So it sounds like you have the freedom. I mean, that's something a lot of people are looking for, right?
Right,
But it took you a while to get there to where you were able to, you know, reap what you sow. Just because it took hard years to even get to the point where you're at, right?
right,
And you're able to kind of be your own boss. And I mean, obviously you've been your own boss, but it's just like you don't have you're you're able to have a company, hire other people to where you could pass on the other responsibilities that you probably had before, right? And then now you could just, you're the boss, so
I don't sell
which is great.
reports anymore. I turn it
Yep.
to my manager. Uh,
Just yep, just oversee certain things. I mean, obviously you're going to have your hands in pretty much everything, just because, it's your business. And so I'm assuming that you've delegated certain responsibilities, so you don't have to do those anymore, which is probably one of the reasons why you have that freedom now,
right,
which is great.
absolutely. I have staff now that take care of all the different.
So you're looking to start your hiring, you said 2 more employees,
Yeah,
is that what it was? Or
we need,
how many were you? Mm,
and we need 2 more.
okay. And then how do you see the next 5 to 10 years for your vineyard?
I think our growth is going to continue, probably 15%, 20% per year, and so we're just trying to, you know, prepare for that.
Yeah, you have to keep up with that growth too, right? So
Yeah,
that's another thing.
you get bigger,
This is I mean,
more invest.
it's great. Yeah, I mean, the more you get into it, the more you get into it, right? It's because the more you invest in it, the more you have invested. So
Right.
it's, but it's great. So because you have probably a sense of an empowerment, entitlement, just because it's not only helping your family, but you're also helping others.
Yeah.
Where you have other employees, and
Well, one of my
I'm sure that's
sales managers been with us 15 years, and my general manager's been with us 13, I think it is now. And so that, they're, I like I like it. We got several people been with us. I got another one's been with us 7, and another one 3 and 2 right now. But I like people to stay long term. I don't like a lot of turnover.
right. It Yeah, and it's just better to have it that way, just because the less turnover. I mean, everyone's going to know the responsibilities. You're not going to have to retrain, and it ends up being like a family,
Mm-hmm.
just because, especially when you're, my experience when living on a dairy farm, like we had we had a lot of help, but the help was always this same help that we've had for like 10, 15 years. Like we knew our milkers, we knew, and a lot of it was family, but we had a lot of people that helped us on our dairy farm for years and years. So,
Yeah.
and then they end up being family. So,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
so it's my understanding that you were were an RV owner.
Mm-hmm.
And that's partly what we do on our podcast. We connect RVers to landowners, and kind of tell us more about your experience about RVing.
Well, we had a fifth wheel for several years that we made some trips with. And to tell you the truth, it there were a few really good parks we visited, but by and large, they were overcrowded and not very well maintained. And so it was disappointing to, you have this, it, when you look at the ads on the TV for RVs, they're always beautiful RVs sitting by a lake in the country or by a beautiful river, and everything is just beautiful. They don't show you the pictures of the RV parks where everybody's crammed together 2 feet apart, right? But we live in a beautiful place and after a few trips, I said, why are we doing this? I don't want to go to an RV park and have neighbors 5 feet from my door. And, and I mean, I live in the country. I was home then out doing trips. And, so it really lost its luster, I guess, for me. But along the way, we had the fifth wheel, and that's how this whole thing started of having visitors on the ranch. I said, well, we'll just stay in the RV while we renovate the house because we did a total renovation. And so I ran in hookups, both water, sewer, and electricity, 50 amp, just out here in the vineyard next to the house. And we lived in there for several months while we renovated the house. And so when it was all done, I had all the hookups there. And so that's how we started down the road of having people come and stay. And I just listed it as just one space. So I want people to realize this was not an RV park. It's just one space. You're in the vineyard, grapevines all around you, and that was the draw for people to come and use it. And we didn't rent it a lot because I charged a lot because I don't want a lot of traffic. Just because it's near my house, it's not too far. And but it was fun to do because you meet really interesting people, and everybody who stayed, I would give them about a 1 hour tour to walk through all the buildings, explain what we do, and they'd all get a bottle of wine for each night they stayed. And so we ran across all these really interesting people that came here. One fellow owned an auto repair shop in the Bay Area and came with his wife and 2 little kids. They came 2 or 3 times. We had another who was a Navy SEAL, and he just gotten out and had some break before he started his job out of the military, and he came with his family. And several professional people, PhD people like that were on trips and things, So we had this cross section of all these different kinds of people, and all really smart, really nice people to have spend time here. And so that was really fun. We sold our RV, we sold our fifth wheel because it just wasn't that good of an experience for me. And we bought a vacation home about an hour's drive away up in the mountains. And so that's what we do with our spare time now. And when we can get away, we go up there. It's up at 4,200 feet, and it's really nice up there.
That's awesome. So, that's one of the reasons why most people look to go RVing, right? Is to look for experiences, and they want to have unique experiences. And what a better place to have a unique experience than a vineyard,
Right.
where you're surrounded by, like grapes and just, and I'm sure, that you've, like you were saying earlier, that you've seen all different walks of life. And so you're able to communicate with people, have relationships, or, with certain people that you probably normally wouldn't come in contact with
Right.
just by hosting, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it is. Since I, didn't intend it to be a profit center, it was just done for, and but it, it was, and we haven't done it much in the last year since we bought the vacation house because it requires me to be here.
Right. Well,
but it's all sitting there. If I want to do it, I can do it anytime I want.
right. That's the nice thing about hosting as well, is that you could set when you want to host someone, or when you have availability, right? So, which is kind of cool. So you could, potentially say, "Hey, I'm going to be gone, so I'm not going to hassle with it,"
Right.
and then just do it on your own schedule. I mean, because
Right.
that's
That's right.
part of having the freedom of what what you're providing. So,
Right. Right. No, and one of the things I see in the RV industry is like in Modesto, just south of us. It seems that they've sold so many RVs in the past few years, just huge numbers. And it seems like, and most of the buyers they live in town, so they can't park them at their house, right? And so there are these huge storage lots full of RVs parked as far as you can see. They pop up, and they've got to be a gold mine because you have no site services whatsoever. You just park RVs as far as the eye can see. And I'm thinking, all the people really looks like they do is go to the RV lot and buy the brand new ones, and then they tow them over here and put them in the store and start paying storage. And, you know, the fact that they're setting so much is, I don't think, a good sign for the industry of manufacturing. And I think that the manufacturers need to be trying to expand not only the developed RV parks, but to expand the alternatives, or else there's not going to be a market for those RVs. That's what I see coming.
yeah. So that's part of the problem we've had. Well, part of the problem we've seen at Curb and Turf is that, yeah, like you're right. There's tons of RVs being manufactured, just not enough places for them to go. So most people let them sit, within their storage. They don't use it. So it ends up being something that they thought would be kind of an investment for their family ends up kind of sitting along the wayside,
Yeah,
and that's unfortunate because during the pandemic, a lot of people were looking to do that, because actually, which is interesting, the RV sales actually gone up during the pandemic. So that tells us at Curb and Turf that people want to get out, they want to experience. Imagine, during that time, everyone was hunkered down. We had to stay 6 feet away from each other, or you couldn't go to public areas. Some states are obviously more stricter than others, so it just depend on where you're living at. But for the most part, people just wanted to get out.
Yes.
They wanted to experience things. So that's one of the reasons why RVs were being sold. So
Mhm.
by I think it was like 500,000. And
Yeah,
so
huge numbers.
yeah, and that's been the case the last like almost 5 years, where it's just there's literally millions and millions of RVs being sold, but just there's no way that to keep up with that volume to where people could stay. If you go to a public area, you have to plan out a year in advance usually, if not longer, depending on the air, depending on where you're going.
Right.
So especially those national parks, especially, I'm sure a lot of places along the coast. I mean, because yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's overcrowded everywhere. So that's why if more availability exists along the lines of curb and turf, it would make places available to people who already have made this tremendous investment. And I think that we know from the fact that people are willing to pay RV parks, and I saw a video by an RV expert the other day. Some parks, the high end ones, are now charging $200 a night, and yet it's apparently most of the RV parks, or at least the nice ones, were bought out by hedge funds,
Yep.
private, in the past 5 years.
Yep.
And apparently they're not real happy with the returns they're getting, so they keep raising the prices.
Was not only that, because I have a friend, I have a friend that does that. He actually bought several RV parks, and what they do is that they'll have half of them, like the space, they try to make it to where there's no vacancies. So in the areas that they do have vacancies, they allow more long-term stays. And so it's
Right.
basically like you're paying for a month, you're paying for 6 months or whatever the agreement is, the lease or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then that way they still get recurring, they're getting income,
Mm-hmm.
and then but at the same time they're taking spots from what normally would be available, but for long term, I'm not saying that's bad. It's just how business is, right? It's because they see a demand. RV parks, they see a demand just because they know that there's tons of RVs being sold. So there's still a huge demand. So they're able to drive that price, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much what they want, because people are willing to pay that just because that's the going rate.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's the ability to do a short term, oh, let's go, to Monterey this weekend, and we'll arrange a park right before the weekend. That doesn't happen because everybody's booked solid.
yeah. And
It's very,
that's one of the reasons why some people just don't even hassle with it. They're like, if they own the RV and they're like, okay, well, you're saying we're booked for a year or however, like and then it's like that almost everywhere. So it's kind of disheartening for people that own RVs where they want to have those experiences. And so I agree with you where platforms like Curb and Turf, where we're solving two problems, right? We're trying to give agribusinesses or property owners a way to supplement income by hosting RVers to stay on their property. And then also RVers where they're looking for a place to stay, And so
right.
by us being the middle person for that, we're trying to provide a platform for both those where people can host like and which right now we've been so focused. We at Kerminter we pride ourselves on trying to we build product that's specifically for an RVer. So we have an app where RVers could plan a trip. They could look for dump sites. So like for in your case, you have a dump station, you have all those
Mm-hmm.
hookups because you set that infrastructure up just because, but you weren't planning on hosting, you
Right.
weren't planning on hosting at that time. It
Right.
was just out of necessity
Yeah.
that you needed that just because it sounded like you're doing, upgrading your home or doing,
Mm-hmm.
remodeling. And so but there's tons of homeowners or property owners that are in the same boat where they probably have they have a spot or they have unique opportunities where RVers could stay on their property, and that's what they're looking for. And
Right.
so, I mean, I anyone that's listening to this that hasn't, if you're a property owner or if you have a agribusinesses, like, we're wanting hosts on our platform just for that reason, just because it is a problem in the industry and a lot of people don't know about it unless you're actually unless you own an RV. It's some of those things where, like you were saying, you see the cool commercials, you don't know the reality of an RV unless you actually own one.
Right.
And that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's lots of things that go into owning an RV. You're talking about the care of it. You're talking about like maintenance and all that stuff. There's tons of things that are involved with RVs.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the unique thing about our platform. We want people to utilize something that they're investing into, because those things are like basically they like have almost a mortgage on them. It seems like,
Oh, I'm are financed and they cost so much money. And to think that you buy it and then move it to a storage facility and that's where it spends most of its life is sitting in the storage facility, that doesn't make sense to
doesn't
me.
make any sense. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we we have this, podcast just to educate not only RVers but property owners, just because they could see what other people are doing, like yourself, because you're just kind of recently started a vineyard to, it's but that's something that you planned on doing, and it's that's great that you're able to do that and you're able to, find those paths to do that. But there's some people that just need answers. And that's one of the reasons why we have this podcast, so we could share your experience and others' experience, just to so other people could glean off that information. Maybe they can learn something.
Yeah. Well, if the RVers that we ran across they were all good people that we were comfortable having, on our property. And, the advantage you have where you're only allowing one or two RVs or whatever, you don't have to worry about all the partiers and all the stuff showing up. And so, it can be a good experience and you can, make some extra money off it and provide a good service to people that own the RVs who really have invested a tremendous amount of money in these trailers and motorhomes. And they they need somewhere to take them, and they should be prepared to spend some money to for good places. It's worth money, and if you spend 100,000 or more, which I mean, our fifth wheel with a new 4x4 pickup under the front of it, well, we had over $100,000, and a lot of these motorhomes are more than that. And so, if you spent that kind of money, don't come crying on my shoulder because you got to drop $100 a night on a nice place to stay. If you can't afford that, why don't you spend $100,000 or more on a rig?
And that's even cheaper than most RV places, especially in California.
Yeah. So they need to be prepared to spend some money, and because the landowner deserves to make something for providing the service.
Yep.
That's
And that's one of the beautiful things about our, Curb and Turf in general, is because we want to empower the hosts as well. So that way you have your rules. So if you have specific rules for your place, people have to adhere to those rules. There's certain, like you're saying, you're paying for for an experience, but it's also, it's someone's property, it's someone's private property. So, and that's one of the reasons why, it is something where we want to make sure that hosts especially realize that we try to empower the hosts as much as we can on the platform. And if there's any suggestions that, current hosts have to better the community, we're always looking for that. And that's one of the reasons why I like Curb Turf, just because we're a smaller team. So we're able to pivot a lot faster than other companies. And we're
Mm-hmm.
able to answer those, situations. Someone, really wants a feature, then we see that benefit, we end up focusing on those features.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
and I love it. And I'm not saying that to be biased, because I've seen both ends. I've seen where we dealing with years or travelers where they're frustrated because they don't know what to do. They're not sure where to go. And you also see amazing people like yourself that, are hosts who have property or have an agribusiness, and they want to share it with people because that's a way they make money, and then some
Mm-hmm.
way they're able to supplement. Because there's probably someone that was like you, maybe 5 years ago, where they were struggling, or they didn't, you know, they couldn't see the light, where it's just like, because there's so many factors that go into anything that's, where you have to harvest, or anything that's agricultural, just because there's so many factors. And a lot of it has to do with the weather. A lot of it has to do with even something that's happening on the other side of the world, where it's like, you know, tariffs or trade, there's just tons of things that influence our own economy, and we don't sometimes realize that.
Right. Right. Yeah. And this is from the landowner's standpoint. It's really a minimal investment. I know some people don't. They don't really provide any hookups at all. Just a place to park, and that's adequate. I mean, most all of these rigs, at least for short term, 2 or 3 days stay,
Yep.
they can function without hookups.
Yep.
They have with them, and so don't have to make the investment in putting hookups in.
Nope. Yep. It could just be raw land, right? It could be
Yeah.
just make sure it's level, and then you're good. Because like you're saying, most RVers, most travelers that have a motor home, they're going to be good for a couple days. They could just go off their reserves. And
Yeah.
that's the cool thing about our app, is that we provide services to where RVers could look for dump sites, they could look
Mm-hmm.
for fresh water, they could look for all those. So if there's a host that doesn't offer those services, then they could still look off the app and, you know,
Mm-hmm. Find a
yep,
place. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yep. And I think it's just a good service to have, and it's only going to get better with people like you, like people having hosts, having a community, having more people that are willing to share their property with others, just because that's what people are looking for. It's
Mm-hmm.
and so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Especially here in California, I think where so many people getting away from the crowds.
yep. People want to
Value.
yep. People want to get away, and they just don't know where to go. So
Many years ago, when our kids were younger, we took an RV trip, and the last day on the way home, and I was really tired, and we stopped at an RV park near Clear Lake, and I'll never forget. It was all real tight, close together, right? And the people in the next RV were having a fight, and we got to listen to them yelling at each other for hours. It was terrible. And so those are the kinds of things that RVers should consider as value. Is when they can come to a place that's
quiet.
rural and it's not crammed in wall to wall trailers. That's worth something.
Yeah, it is. That's worth the trip. you know,
Yeah.
it's because people are wanting to get away. They're not looking to go from one crowded place to another crowded place.
Right.
So
Right.
it doesn't make sense. I mean, like, if me personally, if when taking an RV out, I'm looking for to spend time with family, to being secluded, be a part of nature, having some kind of unique experience or whatever that is, and not being 2 feet away or 10 feet away even from my neighbor and listening to their conversations or whatever, you know.
Yeah, that's why I'm convinced the manufacturers of RVs need to take a lead role in developing places for RVs to people to take their RVs. I mean, they're selling the product and they're only selling. I think they're losing a lot by failing to recognize they're actually selling the experience here, and if the experience is negative, then long term their product goes down in value.
Yep.
Not just the new one, but the one that the manufacturer needs to help his used products maintain their value so that the new ones are easier to sell, right?
Yep.
Well, if people buy them brand new and then a year or two later decide this is not for me because it's not fun, there's no place to go, then that's going to eventually hit home on the manufacturers.
Yep, I agree.
And they need to take some of that pot full of money that they have and facilitate the development and expansion of more places for RVs to go.
Yep, I agree 100%. Just because I think what they've been doing is just trying to make them, because there's a backlog for a lot of these manufacturers because there weren't enough RVs at one time on order. Some of these were on back order, so they're looking to cut costs as far as manufacturing, so they end up being not as good quality as they used to.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of problems that kind of go untold, but that's something that they definitely need to focus on, is the infrastructure just of places for people to go. It's because,
Right.
like you're saying, it all comes down to an experience. And then if someone's going to have a bad experience, and this is a generational thing, because those people have families, so if their kids are having a bad experience, that's going to speak volumes to when they grow up and they have kids.
Right.
It's not, it's it's going to come, it may come and bite them in the butt more than once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean they're invested long term in those manufacturing companies, but I think they need to invest also in development of places to use their products.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons why Curb and Turf exists, just because we want to provide that service, because we see a huge void in the market where there is a big need for places for RVers to stay. So that's, once again, if you own land or if you're a property owner, go to our website, go to www.curbandturf.com, and you could host. It doesn't cost anything to sign up. It's absolutely free. The way we make our money is that we get 15% of any on the reservation costs, and then the owner gets 85%. And that's one of the reasons why other platforms don't offer that. I've seen other platforms where they don't give as much as we give as far as the percentage to the owners. So that's one thing that we also pride ourselves, is that we want to make sure that's mostly beneficial for both hosts and guests, and not one-sided, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay.
Perfect. Well, is there anything else that we could bring up or that you want to talk about?
No, I think you covered it.
Well, I appreciate it. So once again, where can people look for your vineyard?
We're Miramont Estate, Miramont Estate, ESTATE, at Yahoo. That's the email, but .com.
Perfect. It was a pleasure talking to you. It was great finding out more about you, Dave, and learning about your experiences, especially how those experiences led into your winery business and what that's doing for you currently. So I'm happy that you're having more success, and I'm hoping that others that are listening to this, that hopefully inspires them as well, and then they're able to make those steps forward, even if it's something that's hard. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and you could have that freedom, but it comes at a cost, and
Right.
That's
No.
almost anything good in life. That's what it usually it is. So, well, I do appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on with us today.
Okay, thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Recurring Plot, presented by Curb and Turf. Curb and Turf works like Airbnb, but we help RVers to find land where they can park when they're traveling. Make more money from your land. Please visit curbandturf.com to list your property.